Greetings. Now in today's video I'm going to talk about how the Vikings and the Saxons would have stored their weapons, from their sea axes to swords. And I find this a fascinating subject, and I have been a historical reenactor for over 30 years, so I like to think that I've got a lot of knowledge, and I'm also very well read. So here we are in my Viking studio. Here we can see the Thor's hammer of Egil Thorson with all his beads. Lovely, lovely thing. But let's answer the question of how would the Vikings have stored their weapons, from the swords to axes to knives. And this is just a very few of some of the many weapons I own. But how would the Vikings or the Saxons and later on the Normans have stored their weapons? Would they have carried them and stored them in leather bags? Well, possibly so, that's one option. Would they have hung them up from the walls of their longhouse? Well, again, that's a very good option. Would they have hidden them away for safekeeping? Again, I find that to be a fascinating idea. But I also like the idea of the weapons rack, which is where most long houses or long halls at the doorway would have a rack for any guests to leave their weapons, because it was considered to be very ill-mannered to go tooled up, to go armoured in the sense of having a sword or a sea axe and an axe into a longhouse. But to answer this question of how would the Vikings and the Saxons, let's not also forget the Frisians and the Jutes as well, because they also played an important part in early English history along with the Angles. How would the Vikings have stored their weapons? Now, below you'll see a war chest. This is such a lovely item, I must say. Now, I bought this many years ago from T.K. Thorkelson when he was reducing some of his stuff and Viking kit, and I've loved it ever since. So this is one option and one way you may have stored your Viking weapons. Of course, this chest, a war chest, can be locked up, as it has two mechanisms here and a locking mechanism in the middle. You can just see with my little finger pointing. And at some point we will do a more complex video on this splendid, splendid chest. So that is one option for you, and probably the best option to keep your weapons locked away. Because let's face it, swords and pattern mould swords and axes, lance axes, they all cost money. And a lot of money in those times. I do say the equivalent of a Viking sword in today's money would be the same as a house. If a house in the UK is the average price of £220,000, then that gives you some vague idea of how much and how valuable swords and such tools were. You can see a bit of pattern moulding on this one. So there's one way, and I think the best option, to store your Viking weapons. And, you know, there's not a tremendous amount of woodwork involved into making one of these. If you got some skills with woodworking and you could source some good oak or pine or ash or lime or any wood that makes good planking, then you could make yourself a Viking chest. Now, this chest can hold quite a good amount of weapons, but it's also a very practical thing when it comes to safety and being responsible for your weapons. At the moment, I've been doing a lot of filming, so I've got weapons all over the place. And at some point, when I stop filming again for a little bit to go and edit, I will put a lot of my weapons back in this chest, because it keeps them safe and sound. And if we ever get burgled, then it's not going to be the most easiest of chests to lift away or to break into. Now, when I've got this chest filled up to the brim with weapons, when I can just about close it, and I normally got some mail in there, some chain mail, and of course you could also keep your silver coins and your gold and your profit and your jewellery as well, or maybe you may have a smaller separate chest for that. So it's got so many practical uses, and this chest is probably about 25 to 30 years old. Yes, it's worn, it's a bit battered, it's been around the place. I used to take it to camp at some point. And it's a lovely, lovely item. Again, it's got a front plate. Of course, if you're going as a Viking, you're going to break into somebody's longhouse, then a chest like this wouldn't take too much work with an axe to break into it. Let's face it, you know, they've got really good sharp axes. And in the modern times, you know, you could probably just angle grind off these two lugs and get in very, very easily. I mean, it's only iron. But yet, it's not just a chest, it is also a seat. And many a time, me and Eggle, back in the days when we was filming, we used to sit down on this chest. I used to put a couple of cushions on it for Eggle to make it nice and comfy. And, you know, used to love it. But, yeah, so in the Viking times, if you've got a good bearded axe, it wouldn't take much effort to smash your way into that. I mean, if we ever commission somebody to make me a chest I can break in and demonstrate, I think that would be very cool. And I do love chests. And of course, you know, it's not just a practical thing, it's also a symbol of your status. Because it kind of says to people that this Viking has a chest full of weapons in his house. How many weapons would the average Viking have had? Well, probably a spear. If you know, definitely a seax or a sax, depending how you pronounce it. And definitely a shield. And if you're lucky, maybe an axe. And I just think that such cool things, and these are the subjects that I'll never really talked about on camera. We talk about the Viking axes and the flaming weapons and the sagas and the myths of the gods. But some days it's the practical things. Some days it's the things which you don't think about are by far the best. And at some point in the next few days, I'm tidying up my studio to make it a bit more user-friendly, so I can get out another batch of content and film some more long format content. And I do hope you love this kind of a raw, unedited feel to the videos. Apparently now it's so popular on YouTube that it's blowing up channels left, right and centre. Because if you know about the channel and you know about Northworthy, then we've been doing that format for many years. Of course, another option before we go is a weapons whack. This is a more of a modern interpretation. At some point, I will make an authentic one and make it very nice. Oh, there you can see a T-shaped Anglo-Saxon axe. Oh, I love that. Of course, some of these are a bit more modern, like this one. Some of them are Viking, and there's even a cookery there, which I've had for many, many years. In fact, there's a brilliant video of Eggle comparing a cookery to a Saxon and Viking sea axe, and I urge you to check that out. So, there's a few things to talk about, and I think before we finish, we'll just move up and have a look. That's a couple of decent spears, and one of them's winged. You can see here. So yes, Viking storage. Ignore the modernness of this room, but I do think it's a fascinating subject, and I do hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you have, please consider giving us a subscribe. Oh yes, we are Northworthy Sagas and Stories, and we are a channel dedicated to the way of the Viking life. I am myself, I'm a Norse pagan. Some days I call myself a Norse Viking pagan, which is a bit of a contradiction. But we just love what we do. We also love to have fun and to talk about many of the subjects which we love. So it's goodbye from me, goodbye from Bragi, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. And please go and leave us a good old axe emoji in your comments. And also a shield if you love this video. Goodbye.